Welcome back. The part of the show used to be known as Ask Alvin, but it's next up. We have two distinguished guests with us tonight, both attorneys. I don't know who. We'll start with Nina McDonnell, and you're an attorney, I understand, specializing in something involving big words. So,
I practice appellate and post-conviction relief law, so criminal appeals, and then collateral attacks on convictions based on typically ineffective assistance of counsel claims.
Those are big words. And Bevis, Schock, known for his shyness and seriously civil rights lawyer and a well-known attorney in town. How would you correct my introduction?
I'm in general practice, solo, so I don't care what the boss thinks because I'm the boss. And I do a lot of civil rights cases. I've represented a lot of people of all walks of life. And I get up in the morning and I jump on the elevator with happiness.
All right. Well, this week there was, of course, bombshell news out of the U.S. Supreme Court for the combination of Samuel Alito, the justice's opinion that would appear to foreshadow the end of Roe v. Wade, and, of course, the leak of that opinion, which was, if not unprecedented, extraordinarily unusual. We'll start with you, Bevis. What was your reaction to the events of the day?
Well, two things. First, the leak might have come even from one of the justices, so we don't have any idea who leaked. But like, as you said, it's unprecedented. I know a little bit about these clerks. I had classmates who became clerks at the Supreme Court and sworn never to do anything like that. Now, there's also the possibility that the piece of paper was on a desk and a worker at night who was supposed to be cleaning up said, oh, I think I'll put that in my pocket. And, I mean, one never knows, right? An administrative person. But it is the idea of the court is that they can argue with each other aggressively, and then finally they say, okay, I can't agree with you, I'm writing a dissent, the right to dissent, and then it's all released on one day. So when this didn't happen, it stirred everything up. Now, you want to go into the merits, or should we do that in the next round?
We'll do that next round. Let's get you.
I was shocked at first, and then disappointed. I think that the release of a draft is really going to hamper what I think is important inner workings of the court, which is allowing people to decide that they want to change their mind about something or edit things. It was also something that I sort of expected in terms of the opinion, not the leak. I do agree it could be anybody, and it will be interesting to see if any investigations actually give us any answers.
Okay. Well, first, I hope I never need your services, okay?
Me too.
And two, all right, my first thought is, okay, if you examine what could be overturned, I guess we don't know that for sure, but what's next? I mean, that pesky 13th Amendment, you know, if a state decided, hey, we don't think people should be able to drink out of the same water fountain, could a Supreme Court come in and say, like, okay, the majority says that's the way it's going to be, a state can decide that? Or is the fate of things like that in the Supreme Court's hands?
I certainly think that this opinion, if it stands, will and could easily lead to a degradation of rights to contraception. It could affect gay marriage. Any of those rights that are not enumerated within the actual words of the Constitution, so these rights that are found within the liberty guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, any of those decisions, I think, could very easily be on the chopping block.
I don't agree with that. So my take is that the whole legal structure of Roe versus Wade went like this. We were in the middle of a hard controversy over whether to have abortion legal or not. Now, casual empiricism tells me around a third of women in this country have had abortion. So this is something that is a gigantic part of American life. It happens all the time, and that's just the truth. And but what I think the court did in Roe versus Wade is they said, we have all this stature, and we're going to go in and we're going to act like a legislature and settle this. And because of our incredible power, we will resolve and help America with this problem. Now, that's not their job. They got out of their lanes. Most people who are sort of the detached scholars without a gun, without a stake in the abortion debate either way, I think would agree with that it's not based on the Constitution. It was the Supreme Court acting like a legislature, and it's been criticized for that for decades.
Well, there is this matter of stare decisis and settled law, and at virtually every hearing, for every Supreme Court justice on either side of the fence, and maybe I should go to you, Nina McDonnell. I think I may have pronounced you wrong. McDonnell, excuse me. I'm a print guy, you know. What do you think about the what apparent inconsistency with all the things said at confirmation hearings about respecting prior decisions, and what Bevis just articulated, which is a view that I don't know that everybody shares, that this was legislating from the bench?
Well, first off, I actually agree that Roe v. Wade was not a well-written opinion. I think there were huge problems, which is why we've had so many problems with it. As far as the confirmation hearings, I think it was naive of anyone to believe that the justices that were handpicked from a list made by the Federalist Society was not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, I think maybe not all of the justices want to go fully, meaning like no exceptions. But as far as the confirmation hearings, I mean, we didn't have confirmation hearings until the first Jewish Supreme Court justice nominee was brought forth. Yeah. So this isn't like, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that they have to, you know, do these intense hearings and ask the justices about their opinions. So I just think anybody, Susan Collins in particular, was naive in believing that this was not going to happen.
Here, I've been to some of these Senate hearings. I don't watch them on TV, but it's a political theater.
Right.
I mean, politics is Hollywood for ugly people, right? And they get up, and the whole first day they just make speeches and don't even ask the nominee anything. And the nominee's goal is to crawl to the finish line, having said nothing. And that's what they do. Nothing they say should be taken seriously. It's all theater. What do they call it? A Potemkin village. And so I think those hearings, everybody in the country knows they mean nothing.
And I hate to do this to you, Bevis, but I agree with you. And I know that's not something you want me saying. But I want to pursue this. I'm sorry, I'll now shut up here. When you talk about legislating from the bench, take the case, the campaign finance case. I'm losing my mind.
The one I did?
Right.
Years ago?
Yeah.
I went to the Supreme Court of the United States, strict Missouri government. We tried to get rid of campaign finance.
Right. Well, but also like Hobby Lobby, some of those cases.
United.
Citizens United is what I was reaching for. Citizens United was arguably legislating from the bench from the conservative side, but we don't call it that, right?
Oh,
I mean,
that's a little different thing. It gets into the nuances of how far the First Amendment can go. What they did in Roe was they said the Constitution divides a pregnancy into 3 trimesters, and there are different rules for each trimester. Now, that's the legislature's job. For example, how much should we spend on Forest Park? That's not a judge's job.
Right.
That's the Board of Aldermen's job. It's drawing lines, and the job of the Supreme Court and all the courts is to enforce the Constitution. They have to draw some lines, but when they get into drawing lines about trimesters in a pregnancy, they're out of their lanes.
Okay. Similar along those lines, okay? Are there any other amendments that this argument could be taken and said like the Supreme Court was legislative on this? I mean, let's go back to it. I don't know where the country was at on slavery, but a whole bunch of it was pretty fine with it. So are they, you know, like we're just not going to have it anymore, so we're going to outlaw it, but they were wrong, it should be up to the states to do it?
I think that there is something to be said for these types of decisions, specifically abortion, and we're not talking about campaign finance. We're talking about people's bodies, and I think that's a distinction that has to be appreciated and acknowledged. When I was reading the opinion, and I got to page 5, and you can tell by what's going to happen in the first paragraph. But page 5 says, we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, and I let out like I knew it was coming, but it was still so shocking to me to suddenly. I'm almost 40 years old. I was born having this right, and then suddenly I read, no, I don't. And that's a very weird feeling. And maybe, when you're talking about slavery, the slave owners were like, I thought I had a right, now it's gone too. But I don't know that that's very comparable.
Well, to follow up on Alvin, and I was just making the point that that notion of legislating from the bench can go either direction,
Right.
depending on your point of view.
I agree.
But to Alvin's question, let's talk about some of the other rights, and I should be prepared with the exact language that Justice Alito used about American tradition, was it? There was some reference to that, where if it's not in the Constitution, it's not in the Constitution, it doesn't exist. Interracial marriage isn't in the Constitution. Gay marriage isn't in the Constitution, and certainly weren't part of the tradition of this country dating back centuries. There's all this originalist stuff where, presumably they cut some slack because maybe the founding fathers didn't know about the internet or something. But the idea is the founding fathers were not down with interracial marriage. They were down with gay marriage. What is to keep this court from taking the same logic or illogic of Samuel Alito's opinion and apply it to those things?
Sure. So the Ninth Amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be deemed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Okay. So the list in the Bill of Rights is by definition not exhaustive. Right. Now, so slavery outlawed in 13th Amendment. And then equal protection is in the 14th, right, which is, in my opinion, the outcome of the Civil War is the Equal Protection Amendment and the outlaw of slavery in 13. So you take interracial marriage, what that involves is dividing people by their color or their heritage, and that's what the Equal Protection Clause says no. So that's why I'm not as worried about that. So in other words, at the beginning, at the founding father, if someone had talked about interracial marriage, they probably would have been lynched even just for talking about it. And then here we are. We've come a long way. People love each other. The great thing about it was the case that resolved it was a couple named Loving, Mr. and Mrs. Loving, one of them black, one of them white. They won that case on the name of who they were. But I just don't see anything going really in that direction.
Gay marriage, Billy? You don't think gay marriage?
Contraception is, so what about contraception? Yeah. So contraception is hedged in the same idea that there's a privacy right, that the government shouldn't be able to come into our bedrooms. And Roe, for all of its faults, also used that privacy right. So I'm not understanding your delineation that one thing that was hedged in privacy under the term liberty of the Due Process Clause and another. How can you think that they're not going to come after contraception, for example?
I think that the difference actually is religious. In other words, there are a whole lot of people who believe that a human life is at stake at the moment of contraception. So let's look at it from the perspective of the death end of life. We say, oh, can Dr. Kevorkian kill somebody by giving them an intentional injection because they're suffering? We all think, well, no, you can't do that. And so maybe that's somewhere there's God in that. Somewhere there is an idea of religion. Now the people, my belief is the vast majority of people who oppose abortion base it on a religious belief of the sanctity of life defined by God. That's what I think that's what they think. Sure. Regardless of whether it's right or not, it's an unknowable thing whether it's right. But it's a heartfelt feeling. And it's, I think, completely different than any other issue because of the belief that there is an actual human life in the womb which is created by God and has to be protected.
But Justice Alito's draft opinion specifically talks about, it's not perceived life, like possible life, that it's not necessarily guaranteed. And he quotes Roe in saying this idea. So that's why I think contraception could be at issue. So the people that are most against contraception are also very religious people who also have these very well-meaning beliefs. And if we can't have abortion in the first trimester because of possible life, then why can't that exact same reasoning be used to outlaw contraception?
I mean, I think it could be. I don't think it would be. I mean, I think they're different in kind. The old saw about, hey, if you push an old lady out of the way of a bus and save her life, you're doing one thing, and if you push an old lady into a bus, you're doing something else. But either way, you're pushing around old ladies. I mean, they're different, right? Pushing a lady out of the way of the bus is different than pushing the old lady into the way of the bus. And I think it's fundamentally different.
I want to follow up on what you said, but please
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I want you to go.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I got to percent because we've got to split these questions. You mentioned, you brought up religion in previewing my column for next week's RFT. What does, and I don't really want to, we want to stick to the law, but what does anyone's religion, what business does it have in our laws? In other words, in making laws. I'm Jewish. Why should the Jewish religion, and it's not an interest group, it's a religion. If you go to the Talmud, a human being becomes born when the head leaves the womb, when it takes a breath, he or she takes a breath. In, I think it's Exodus, if you cause a woman to have a miscarriage, it's a civil offense. In the same passage, if you kill somebody, it's eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, capital punishment. Jews do not believe that a fertilized egg in the womb is a person. They don't believe it. So the question is, and you're a civil libertarian and so forth, why should Jewish women have their lives governed by the Catholic Church's view of when life begins, which you properly identified as a purely religious decision? What is the government doing adjudicating that religious view?
Well, that's to me what the job of the legislature is. So, in other words, I think we would all agree that a human life is a sacred and beautiful thing. I mean, surely that's something that,
we just don't agree on when it begins.
I hear you on that. That's correct. Now the question is, how do we decide? That's the hard one. And is it going to be by a judge in a robe, or is it going to be by people we elect? Because we have to decide as a society. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about these last few days is people have been counting states. Well, Missouri's going to outlaw it. Illinois is going to keep it. That's what's going to happen our neighbors. I mean, I think, right?
Well, it's a trigger law in Missouri, but yeah.
So that's what's going to happen. So the question is, how do we decide? Now, one of the things I'm looking forward to in it is that the state legislative races are going to mean something. I mean, these things are going to become super important, and I think that's good.
Do you have anything to add before I go? All right, so what makes a legislative body qualified to make this decision?
That's the best question of all, and the answer is that there's no better way. In other words, we have a right to have an election. We live in a republic. Our Constitution guarantees each state a Republican form of government, which means we have an election of legislators. I think there's one, maybe Nebraska's unicameral. The rest of them are bicameral. There's a Senate and a House kind of model. I mean, what better way could we have than dividing up the place into some districts and electing people, and they go up there and they decide.
What about the
That's their
First
job.
Amendment? Nina, what do you think? I think the First Amendment's a better way, which is government shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. This is not the role for I want to get your view of that. Why should legislatures be making this religious determination about when life begins? Why not leave it to the religions? What do you think?
I don't think that they should. I think it's outrageous that bodies can decide what I can or cannot do with my body. One thing that I really wanted to come back to as we were talking about, you know, the common law and the reliance on those. I looked at all of, you know, there's an Appendix A and an Appendix B, and it lists when all of the states criminalized abortion. Missouri is the one that started in 1825. Of course, we went first.
Of course.
And every single state and territory that opinion mentions and lists, save one, all made those laws before women had the chance to vote. And at common law, we were property. So this notion that I actually start with a textualist view when I'm dealing with law. But at some point, when you are talking about, well, in the opinion says something about the 13th century, you know, and this is what they thought back then, and I'm like, but there's no women that had any voice in any of this.
Great point.
And so now women are being placed in this position where we have to claw back anything that we've had, and Justice Alito's draft opinion advises us of all the ways that women can accomplish that. But the reality is that we are coming from a paternalistic, a misogynistic set of laws and customs, and then trying to say, okay, women, now you just go ahead and fight it all on your own. And that seems very wrong to me. So,
Mr. Reid?
Okay, so we're now at this point in time, okay? So we all took debate class sooner or later. You make the opposite case. All right, you represent, you know, a different point of view.
Sure.
And it doesn't have to be like, you know, as long as the opinion was.
So if I were going to say, let's keep the rule, I think it would have to be on what Ray said, which is the stare decisis issue. Now, the problem with that is, here I'm going immediately on the other side of it and not doing my job as assigned, but the court over the years has overturned countless decisions, the big giant one being Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. So when the court gets it wrong, and I will tell you that I think countless opinions, Clarence Thomas will be 8-1. He's the dissenter. He says, this is wrong, and we should change it, and nobody cares. Because it's stare decisis. 8 people say it's better for the country to just keep it like it is. So the argument that, I mean, I always think in some of those, everybody on that court knows it's wrong. They got it wrong in 1940 or whatever it was. But we just have to leave it in order to keep stability in the nation, which is incredibly valuable. And that's what's valuable here. Now, I can make another point. We're going to have abortions. That's what's going to happen. And when I talk about 1 in 3 women having an abortion, I don't know if that's right, but I don't think it's way wrong. And I'm doing that strictly on the basis of casual empiricism, talking to people I know.
Okay, I got to put you on the spot too. Sure. If you got to make the other argument, just real quick.
I can actually make the argument pretty well. I don't think that Justice Alito's opinion is totally wrong. I think that there is something to be said for decisions being left to the states. I think it accurately acknowledges the fact that it didn't do anything, Roe did not do anything to bring the country together, which I think was the hope. Although I find that kind of hilarious because this will not bring the country together either. But
that's for sure.
No, it's not.
But there is something to be said for states' rights, right? And the power of making decisions should go, for the most part, to the states. I just, you know, and I can see where the state may have, you know, this compelling interest. in preserving life, I would say that if I was arguing this, my argument starts to fall apart when we talk about the safety nets that we have for pregnant women in healthcare, for the child, the fact that our country is fine with allowing a pregnant woman to be all on her own when she's pregnant, despite the fact that the last time I checked, it takes 2 people to get to this position. So there are good parts of the opinion, and I do agree that you know, the Justice Alito makes out, you know, that there was no real historical back to Roe, and I agree with that. The problem is then we flip it and I say, right, but women didn't have a chance to in any of those laws, right?
All right, you got about 30 seconds. You've done a case in front of the Supreme Court, same as any other case, or?
I was a party, not. I didn't argue it. A law professor at WashU argued it. We won below and we lost there, and we thought that they were going to overturn all campaign finance on First Amendment grounds. We lost, so there you go.
All right, it looks like they're sitting really high. Are they really high, looking down upon you, like, you know, like it just, all the pictures I see are like.
What's bad about it is that they interrupt each other.
Oh, all right, kind of like that.
We don't. No. In fact, speaking of which, we are out of time. We want to thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Nina McDonnell. I'll get it right once. I've butchered your name all night. Bevis, Schock, I got your name right. We want to thank you, and we want to thank our Channel 9 audience, 9 PBS audience, for joining us tonight. Have a safe night. Good evening.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.